What is going on, everybody? It is me again. It's Horror Fan 34, and welcome to another video. Now, I apologize. If I'm like doing this every so often. It's the last day and a half or so. It's been extremely muggy, which is really rare around this time. It's not even the summer yet, and um, it's just been really, really muggy, really sticky, a lot of humidity. So I actually have the fan on high right now, pointing directly at me as I'm doing this. And probably after this, I'm gonna grab a cool shower, things like that, and cool off a little bit because it is muggy tonight. But that's not what this video is about. And I need a drink because it's thirsty as hell. But getting onto the hand of what this video is about, this is going to be a sort of series of videos where I'll be showing underrated 80s gems. Now these are basically movies that I feel are very underappreciated, very underrated. They're not really spoken of that much, and I feel like they deserve more talk. And I figured for each part I'll do 5 films because I want to be able to talk about them and not have to rush and do like 10 per part. I'd rather just do 5 for each part, so that way I can talk freely more and not have to rush with each movie that I show. So I figured this would be the first 5 films I'm going to talk about that are from the 80s that I consider underrated. Now, if you I'm mainly doing this video too because to introduce some movies to people that they might not know about, or maybe they might pique their interest or something like that. Because I like to recommend films that I don't think get brought up that much. So, without further ado, let's get on to the first 5 that I'm going to be talking about. The first one here that I picked for underrated 80s gems is Cop. This is when I think about like underrated films from the 80s. This is always the number one that always pops in my head. It's my favorite James Woods film. It's one of my favorite roles of James Woods as Lloyd Hopkins. And the title, Cop, he's a detective, a cop, and there's a serial killer on the loose, and he's trying to push it, and people are telling him to back off because they think he's nuts, and there's no way they're going to catch the killer, and but James Woods is determined to catch this killer. And I know this film did very, very badly when it came out. It got like literally nothing at the box office. And apparently, James Woods was a big supporter of this. I mean, he produced the film. Yeah, I mean, it says it right here. He was a big producer of this film. And I know the director, James B. Harris, actually there's a commentary on here with James B. Harris, the director. This is the same guy that went on to direct Boiling Point with Wesley Snipes, and sadly that was the last film he ever directed in 1993. But James B. Harris has a lot of really great knowledge on the commentary. He talks a lot about working with James Woods and how James Woods was very passionate about this project, and very passionate, and you could definitely tell James Woods gives a powerhouse performance in this film. And I'll tell you what, and I mentioned this before whenever I talk about this film. Jesus, I need a drink. Oh, this is the muggy weather. I talk about this a lot too when I mention this film. The ending to this film, like the final shot, is absolutely satisfying. It's like the greatest ending in movie history. Like the last shot of the film. I'm not going to ruin it. And don't watch the trailer either, because they give the ending away in the trailer, which I think is really stupid to do that. It's a great build-up to the very end. It's gritty, it's dark, and you get some really dark moments, and James Woods' powerhouse performance. Also great supporting actors like Charles Durning, Leslie Ann Warren, Raymond J. Barry, that's another character actor who's in here. Very well directed by James B. Harris, and like I said, James Woods just gives a powerhouse performance in that. I cannot recommend Cop enough. Especially get the one. This is the Kino Lorber Blu-ray. Definitely get this for the commentary with the director. It's a very well done commentary. The next one here I'm going to mention for underrated gems from the 80s is this film, Shakedown. Also, this is one from Shout Factory. I never really thought about, this kind of concept when it comes to this movie, but this is technically a buddy cop movie in a way, because you have Peter Weller as a attorney, and he teams up with an undercover cop played by Sam Elliott. And there's like a whole drug cartel going on with drug lords, and there's corrupt cops involved, and like Peter Weller's an attorney trying to expose them, and Sam Elliott's an undercover cop, and no one's listening, and they're brushing it off. So Peter Weller and Sam Elliott team up together to try and stop this drug cartel and these corrupt cops. And I think the dynamic between Peter Weller and Sam Elliott is fantastic. I think these two have a great back and forth. It's definitely one of the more underrated films that these two have been in. I mean, I'm a big fan of Peter Weller from RoboCop, and of course he voiced Batman in The Dark Knight Returns. I mean, Peter Weller, Of Unknown Origin, that's a great one as well that he did. Screamers, that's another great one that he did. And I'm a big fan of Sam Elliott as well. And it's very well directed as well by James Glickenhaus. This is the same director that did The Exterminator with Robert Ginty. I would say this is definitely my favorite film James Glickenhaus directed. Like I said, the dynamic between these two was great. You got some hard-hitting action, R-rated, very well done action sequences, like really good car chases, and it's one of the more underrated action films from the 80s, definitely, for sure. Next one here, when it comes to underrated 80s movies, Raw Courage. This is a film I actually just showed recently in an update. But basically, if you like films like Deliverance or Southern Comfort, you would definitely like this film. The whole idea is that you have these three runners here. You have these three marathon runners, played by Ronnie Cox, Art Hindle, and Tim Mayer. Ronnie Cox, great actor, Total Recall, RoboCop, and he was also in Deliverance. You have Art Hindle, who was Claire's boyfriend in the original Black Christmas. He was in Porky's, The Octagon with Chuck Norris. He was in The Brood. He's been in a lot of movies. You have Tim Mayer from Psycho 2. He's the kid in Psycho 2 who goes into the wine cellar with his girlfriend, and he ends up getting stabbed by the killer in Psycho 2. That's Tim Mayer. And the three of them are these marathon runners, and they're going to go through this like 72-hour sort of like run, like a practice run right before the big marathon. It's like an overnight thing. They're going to run through the New Mexican desert. And when they get back into town, it's going to be a big celebration at this parade, like celebrating their final thing before their big marathon and things like that. And while they're out there, they end up getting captured by like a sort of like a militia group, like these crazed like military commandos that are on a mission, and they're headed by M. Emmett Walsh, who plays their colonel. And at first it starts off as a joke. They're saying like, oh man, we scared the crap out of these guys really good, and come on, let me get you a beer, and they're joking around, and it starts off okay, but then the three runners, I literally hate this camera. What I was trying to say is, it starts off as a joke, and things like that, but then the runners realize that this military commando group is treating this woman that works for them really poorly. They're mocking her, and the runners stand up for this woman. They stand up for her, and the commando people don't like that, and they take offense to that. Ultimately, something tragic ends up happening to one of the runners, and then that starts a war. Pretty much just ruins it on the back here, where you see one of the guys lying down, and that really starts this whole war with the runners and the military commando people. And other actors in here, you have one of the other ones that is one of the commandos is William Russ, who was the dad in Boy Meets World. He was the dad in American History X. The black and white flashbacks, Edward Norton's dad. In the flashbacks, he's in here as M. Emmett Walsh's son. Other people in here, you have Lois Chiles from Moonraker. It was actually written by Ronnie Cox as well, and it's a really well done thriller. Keeps you on the edge of your seat. And M. Emmett Walsh is an excellent, great character actor. Plays a really good bad guy. Next one here for underrated is Red Scorpion, my favorite Dolph Lundgren film. Basically, Dolph Lundgren's version of Rambo, pretty much. It's R-rated. It's got action-packed sequences. Really great effects by Tom Savini when the guy's arm gets blown off. And, Dolph Lundgren plays Nikolai Rodchenko, who's a Soviet Special Forces guy. Great, just a fantastic performance by Dolph Lundgren. It's really fun, entertaining. Also, M. Emmett Walsh is also in here as well. You also have Brian James from 48 Hours in here. I mean, really fun, just 80s action film. And if you hear that downstairs, that's my dog barking. And the last one that I'm going to mention here for underrated movies from the 80s is Uncommon Valor. When I think of, underrated sort of, war movies, I always think of this one. This is, the first film that dealt with the idea of rescuing POWs in Vietnam, and then you would have films later on like Rambo 2 and the Missing in Action movies. Gene Hackman's son is missing in Vietnam, and he gets his son's team back together, and they're going to go back to forget where it was at. Laos, that's what it was, in Laos. And the team, you have Fred Ward, Red Brown, Randall Tex Cobb, a very young Patrick Swayze. I mean, it's got heart, it's got drama, it's got nice bits of humor, it's got the action, great acting, especially from Gene Hackman. I cannot recommend Uncommon Valor enough. So that's the end of the first part of the underrated gems from the 80s. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.